Hi, my love. Welcome to the Gemma Hanley podcast. My name is Gemma. I'm your host. This is the space where I have honest conversations about overcoming anxiety and overwhelm so that you can calm your nervous system and feel really confident and happy and calm from within yourself. Along the way, I share my own stories of holistically healing 23 years of anxiety and depression myself. And so if you're a woman seeking answers to perfectionism, people-pleasing, burnout, resistance, you may love, you're in the right place. Let's do it. Let's begin. And before we begin, I want to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which I am recording from, which is the Gubbi Gubbi tribe. And I want to extend that acknowledgement to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as anybody of Indigenous or Torres Strait Islander heritage watching this replay. Hola, lady love. Welcome back to the potty. I have just had a delicious chicken schnitzel for lunch. My belly is very full, maybe a little bit uncomfortably full. And I'm sitting here in my lounge room, stoked that we've returned to the season or the time of the year where the sun stays up above the mountain for longer than 3 p.m., which is ideal for me because it means I don't need to worry about any lighting when I'm recording the potty, because these videos for the podcast also go across to YouTube. So it's just one less thing to worry about, makes my heart very happy and brings a little more ease to the day. Let's dive into this conversation we're here to have today. It's been inspired from a coaching conversation that went down inside Reveal and Rise recently, where it was almost like a series of fireworks of aha moments for the women. And when I spoke through one of the things I'll share in this podcast episode in relation to the perception of primary caregivers and the role that we may feel that they've played in us arriving to a space of dis-ease, dysfunction, disharmony in our lives. And so it felt really important to bring, because it was a moment that has stayed memorable. And one of the things that I want to mention before we dive into this conversation, I'm actually just going to pick like a few header topics and speak on them a little bit. This is powerful information, especially for any woman who probably is already like dabbling or in the work of healing any mother and father wounds, looking at attachment styles, working with her inner child, really looking at the imprints that she acquired from childhood, the coping mechanisms, the skills, the subconscious patterns that are playing out. So some of what this could look like is overachiever, perfectionist, people pleaser, the helper, these types of roles that can often lead us to a place where we're abandoning ourselves, our needs aren't met, and then that is showing up in our life as pain and suffering, basically. And so this conversation, it's going to be rooted in what we might call, I'll put it out there, what we might call some cold, hard facts. And that is not to say that the experiences we have when we're walking the path of realizing that these cold, hard facts are a part of healing is easy. It is definitely very, very freaking challenging. And it asks us and calls us into courage and mess and vulnerability that a lot of the time, we didn't even know we were capable of, which is quite beautiful about healing and growth. Our nervous system, our neurology gets to expand, and then we get to feel the benefits and ripple effects of that in all different areas of our life. However, when we're in it, it fucking sucks. It is really, really hard. It is not a preference, I'm sure, by any means. And so I want you to know before we start this conversation, of course, this is a path I've walked myself, so I know it well. I 100% have empathy and am in touch with how freaking hard it is to be the woman who fully signs up and takes ownership of her healing. I also know that if you're in this, you already know it's hard. Me talking about how hard that is, or bringing a 30 or 60-minute conversation filled with empathy, from my perspective, is by no means going to add value or support or a new tool to your toolkit that will help you move forwards. And so, I just wanted to name that, because this conversation is not going to be for everyone. We are going to be diving into some cold, hard facts about what healing calls us into. And it might at times feel like we're just going right in there. Yeah, because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to be of service, and I'm here to help. And I'm devoted to that. What else do I want to say? I think I also just want to share, to begin with, like, this is where part of this conversation is where my story started. And so I can remember when I was bedbound, housebound, unable to walk also, or even cook myself a meal, I realized how much my physical body required my emotional healing, or my emotional curiosity, before I was going to see the chronic illness dissipate. And of course, the anxiety and depression as well. And this big fear that arose within me was, oh my gosh, what if my family, what if my primary caregivers are not willing to have these conversations with me that I might need to have, even though maybe I don't want to have them either? What if they're not willing to have them with me? Does that mean that I can't heal? Yeah. And at this point in time, I'd spent 3 years in therapy. And so I knew my problems and the relationship dynamics inside out. Yeah. What I didn't know or have any clue around from the therapy model was what to do about that. How do I change that? I could articulate the problems, I could see the problems playing out, but my nervous system was still reacting and going into overdrive and fight, flight, flee, fawn when those patterns were playing out, right? And so it became really clear to me that there was another level or another stage of healing that would need to take place if I actually wanted to heal my body emotionally and physically, right? Here's something else that I want to share. And I had to realize this too. So long as we are somebody, so long as we're a woman that is hooked into blaming somebody outside of us, finger pointing, and there are emotions of resentment or anger, or a really strong judgment or trigger towards somebody else, your nervous system is the one suffering. You are the one with the problem, right? Even though the tendency or the desire can be to point the finger outwards and say, yeah, but it's because of them. It's because they should have done better. Yeah. And so where I want to, like, the first topic or subheading, or I can't remember what I called it before, heading. Let's go with heading. The first heading I want to dive into is codependency. Yeah. Because so long as we're attached to somebody else needing to be a certain way, or somebody else needing to change before we can have what it is that we want. Yeah. So they must do that before I can feel good, basically, or this must happen before I can be happy. Yeah. There is a dependency and an attachment in that relationship, right? And it is one thing to see that it has played out in childhood, and as an adult decide that you are not going to engage with that anymore. Yeah. It is another for your nervous system to actually be a reflection of that. Yeah, that you can feel really calm and grounded and regulated regardless of what that person is doing. So it's one thing to like logically and physically stop showing up and stop playing out the pattern that has caused pain and suffering in the past that doesn't feel functional or healthy. It's another for your body to also no longer be having that experience. Yeah. Because what I see a lot of is, you know, I'm going to use this word in inverted commas, boundaries, because I don't believe this is a boundary as such. People have been cut out. You've cut people out of your life. And yet your nervous system or the conversations that you're having or the common focus of your thinking, your thoughts, a busy mind is still very much hooked in and attached to that relationship. And whilst we're primarily talking about mum and dad relationships here, yeah, so your relationship with your mum and with your dad or your primary caregivers, this can actually be true for the relationships we've created beyond that as well. So could be a cool moment to reflect and look at, okay, where is that maybe happening in all the different relationships in my life, right? The very the very empowering thing or option that's available that most of us don't truly understand or know about is that we can actually change that. Yeah. We don't actually need our parents to be different before we can heal and regulate what is happening in our nervous system. And we're going to go into that in a later subheading or topic or title. I'm going to maybe go through 3 ways that you can begin shifting this up. Yeah. Taking back your power and letting go of the story that you have to wait for your parents to be different before you can be different. Yeah. Or that if your parents don't ever shift or change in how they relate with you or how they show up for you, that your life can never be different, because that's not actually true. Yeah. And one of the ways this resentment can show up too is, you know, when we are walking the path of doing this inner healing and we're doing the best that we can, but we don't feel like it's really gaining traction. And this can go on for years, right? Is that we can begin to resent that, either resent or embody this arrogance, be on our high horse a little bit of, well, I have the courage to do this work. I've been called forward to do this inner healing. Why shouldn't they have to? Yeah. This is the higher path. This is the high road. Why shouldn't they have to walk it as well? Right? Because at times our healing and growth can feel like punishment. It can feel like we've gotten the shit end of the stick. Right? And as a flow-on effect from that, we can begin to belittle others, including our parents, if we feel or we have the perception that they're not showing up to their own inner work, right? And this is also going to link into, the 3 little tips or directions that I'm going to give you at a later stage. Here's the piece that came up on the coaching call. Before I jump into it, I feel like some people would call this a reframe. As a coach, I'm really not into that. And this could just be like a definition thing of that word reframe. But for me, when I hear the word reframe, I think, oh, you need to almost force yourself to look at things a different way or to take a different perspective of things, right? Whereas how I like to explain what is happening instead of a reframe, or what the truth of a reframe is to me, is that we're actually correcting misfacts. Yeah. So you're not creating a new frame of a situation. You're realizing that the situation as you saw it was never actually true. Yeah, there were some facts missing. And one of my favorite ways to explain this is, if you imagine there's a photograph, and and maybe it's a really big landscape photograph and it's been cropped into a square so that it perfectly fits on a social media feed, and you can't fit the full landscape photo in, right? And then you go rummaging around the house and you find a printed out version of this photo and you realize, oh my gosh, well, there were all these other things happening in the background of this photo that I never even knew existed because I've been hyper focusing on the cropped image. Yeah. Which isn't bad or wrong. It's all we've had the capacity for, or all we've received, or all that we've received from our subconscious, either because we haven't been ready to receive more or we haven't had the skills to inquire and ask for more information and ask for more intelligence from the body. Because our subconscious is limitless. It has a memory, it has an imprint rather. It stores all of our memories, all of our emotions, everything that has taken place throughout our life, right? And so if we use this analogy of the photo that was cropped and you've spent your whole life just looking at the cropped part of the image, and then you realize there's this whole other image with all of these things happening in it, then you're not really reframing the situation. You're just realizing that there was always this greater truth to it. Yeah. And that without that greater truth, you're not in touch with the entire facts of reality that you need to be able to get to where you want to go. Yeah. So this is the conversation that came up on the Reveal and Rise coaching call, which was one of the women, brought to the call that she was feeling absolutely devastated, beaten down, exhausted, frustrated, basically at her wit's end, feeling extremely critiqued and judged and controlled by her mum. Yeah. Feeling like her mum was needing to have an opinion on everything when it wasn't even asked for, that it was becoming overbearing, that she was still, in that mothering role of thinking that she could tell this client of mine what she can and can't do as if she was still a child, right? And my client was finding that really triggering for her nervous system. And of course, a big part of what this client had already and continues to acknowledge is that whilst that pattern to the relationship, or sometimes I call it a dance in a relationship, so the steps that each person does to create the dance that the relationship is, and that both of them know, whether that is conscious or subconscious, is that as she journeyed through adulthood, she'd never set clear boundaries about what her needs were. So every time her mum, and other relationships probably as well, with other people, overstepped and maybe projected onto her or gave more advice than she was willing to receive or wanted to receive, or basically came in as a wet blanket on one of her dreams and had her feeling as if there was something wrong with her. She was crazy for thinking that she could pursue this thing that she wanted, that she was being irresponsible, and that it's not possible for her, right? And so, part of this was her acknowledging, oh, okay, I can see as an adult this is playing out, and I have the opportunity to say no, or to say, hey, this is actually where the line is for me, or to even begin communicating from a place of, this is something, I want to share something with you that I'm really excited about. But just before I do, I want you to know I'm not actually looking for any opinions. Yeah. And then proceeding. So even providing a context for when she's communicating and when she's sharing, which she's begun to do. And it's very, very fucking cool to watch. But in addition to that, one of the questions that I asked her, and one of the questions that I often ask my clients and teach them to begin asking themselves is, in this instance where it feels like somebody is out to, what's the word I want? Belittle you, to knock you down, to question your ability, to really dampen your vibe, to dampen your sparkle. What do you think their highest intention is, or their most pure intention? Yeah. What's their most pure intention? What's their highest purpose in that behavior? If you were to assume that it's not possible that they were coming from poor intentions, it's not possible that they were intentionally trying to ruin your day, yeah, or beat down your confidence or destroy your vision or your plans. If you were to assume that their intentions are pure and that there's a higher purpose behind their behavior, yeah, of maybe nitpicking, criticizing, trying to control, whatever the triggering behavior is, what would that pure intention be? What would that highest purpose be? Right? And in this instance, some of the answers that my client gave back was, oh, well, maybe she's trying to protect me. Maybe she's worried that I won't cope if I follow through with this thing. Yeah. Maybe she is concerned that if it doesn't go well, I will be really disappointed and I'll be really upset and basically I'll suffer. Yeah. And so she began to be able to pull these threads of, okay. As well as this feeling as if I'm being criticized and patronized and judged, as well as this feeling like my mum is basically saying to me, you can't make good decisions, you're irresponsible. Maybe underneath that, there is this desire that she has that I'm living the happiest, healthiest life that I can. Yeah. Which would actually be an intention that comes from love and care. And even though it's not hitting the mark, even though it's feeling wildly misguided when my client or any of us are on the receiving end of that type of behavior, the trigger within us immediately begins to diffuse and dilute a little bit when we can acknowledge, okay, even though this person, yeah, and this conversation is around the mum or the dad, your mum or your dad, even though mum is totally missing the mark in what is true and right for me here, and I feel so deeply unsupported, I actually feel so deeply unloved, I can see that from her perspective and from her narrative and maybe from her cropped picture, that she believes she's giving me the best advice she possibly could. Yeah. That's part of it, part of the conversation that we had. And this is where all those like ping, 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 ping moments happened with the women on the call of, oh my gosh, okay, maybe my mom or my dad like isn't out to get me. Maybe they're not intentionally trying to hurt me or to cause me pain. Maybe they're actually doing their best and it's just not hitting the mark for me. And I'm noticing consistently that I'm feeling misunderstood or let down or disappointed. But I'm not also noticing that maybe they're doing the best that they know how. And maybe they're doing the best based on what they were taught from their parents. Yeah, your grandparents. And maybe your grandparents were doing the best based on what they were taught from their parents, which is their great grandparents. Right? And something that's been really interesting, the more and more I journey through my own healing and growth, is how overwhelming the compassion is that I have been able to have for my own parents, and reflecting back on moments that I just wasn't even willing to consider when I was in pain and when I was hurting because I was on the receiving end of, parenting that didn't feel loving, parenting that felt unfair, right? But in having healed that with myself, and we're going to go into that part of the conversation soon, but because I don't need at a primary level anything from my parents anymore. I don't need them to be a certain way. Yeah. I don't demand or desire for them to change. I'm able to love them as exactly as they are and genuinely fucking deeply love them. Yeah. With that, I've created the space in my nervous system because it's regulated and it's calm and it's loved to be able to see, holy shit. There are moments I can reflect on where I've observed my parents as the child in a relationship dynamic with their parents that would have been insanely painful to experience. Yeah, from my perspective. And so, again, I'm not talking about a reframe. I'm talking about how willing we are to look at these. I think I called them cold, hard facts, or maybe like the brutal facts of what's actually taking place and what needs to be looked at in our healing. And as an extension of that, there will be times, yeah, and here's what I want to say, once you become an adult, yeah, as an adult, the playing field kind of becomes a bit even, right? Like everybody's adults. And whilst we all have these inner childs that can be stirring within us at times, pleading and begging for our attention, creating these experiences of internal tantrums where we feel like we're being triggered and our nervous system is flaring and we're going into the fight, flight, flee fawn. Our parents or primary caregivers, they have that too. And so at times, the way that they're responding to you or how they've chosen to parent, so if we go back to like more of those feelings of being controlled or critiqued or judged, right? That also has nothing to do with you at times and everything to do with the unhealed parts, the wounded parts within them and their own nervous system flaring as well. Yeah. And I really, really, truly believe that this understanding is part of what it means to really be showing up in the world as an adult and as a woman who is in your power. Yeah. And it's very difficult to accept at times. It's way easier to do the finger pointing or to blame others. Yeah. Or to stay caught up in this false narrative that purely because these two other adults in the world with labels of mum and dad are present, and that once upon a time you were a child, even though you actually are not anymore, that they should show up first or they should have to show up better and you shouldn't have to do the heavy lifting in the relationship. Right. And so I want to move into now the next subheading, like the last little point that I wanted to speak on here, which is what to do about this. Like, how do you shift your focus, right? Because, like I said, and it was my experience too, I'm like, this feels unfair. This feels wrong. Like, how is it that as the child, I'm needing to heal these things and these patterns and these imprints that I was given in childhood, right? So I just want to reiterate, it's not about that anymore. And your parents were a child at one point too, and so were their parents. And this is really, really, really honestly a huge turning point for any woman that I see in coaching is when they really let this go and they're truly able to stop subtly Yeah. And in a sneaky way, and I say subtly and sneakily because they don't even realize it's happening. So you're not consciously aware of this, but punishing their parents with a flow on effect of staying stuck themselves. Yeah. And what I mean by that is seeking love, significance, connection, validation because you're in pain, because you're suffering. Yeah. And like I said, this won't always be obvious that it's happening. I think one of the most basic things I've ever heard around this that explains it in a really clean, short way is letting people live rent free in your mind, right? But I would suggest even in your body. Yeah. And so it's like you're prioritizing staying angry at people, resentful at people, bitter at what life has dished up for you. You're prioritizing being right and making others wrong and finger pointing because there's, this feeling that I don't want to do this and I shouldn't have to do this. And why do I have to do this? This being your healing. This being having really hard and honest conversations. Yeah. Setting boundaries. Making changes in your life that are really challenging and would be easier to just sweep under the rug. And so when I say this really is a tipping point or a turning point for clients in whether or not they do or don't get results, another way I can word that is this tipping point or this turning point of, are you really going to be the woman that doesn't sweep things under the rug? Yeah. Are you really going to bring to the surface in the relationship with yourself first? Yeah. All the things that are really hard and inconvenient and messy and maybe even scary and super vulnerable and very uncomfortable. Are you going to let them come to the surface so you can actually deal with them, heal them, and move beyond them? Yeah, because some of the things that we have to do to shift our focus and to take ownership of the fact that we don't need our parents to change before we can heal. We don't need our parents to change before we can have everything that we want. Yeah. Is that you will have to be able to fully acknowledge and not just acknowledge, but step into, embody the truth that you are an adult now. Yeah. Despite having this inner child playing out inside of you that feels like extreme anxiety and hurt and conflict and shame and guilt and confusion. Yeah. That you can reparent yourself. And I truly feel this is, society doesn't reflect this back. Society does not stand, on a stage with a microphone and say, like, you have this power within you to heal yourself. You don't need the people around you to change. Right? And when you realize that this is true, you become unstoppable. You become extremely powerful as a woman. Yeah. Because you can. What your inner child is calling out for is for her needs to be met. And you get to go inwards and meet her in those, to listen to her, to ask her, what did you need instead in that instance? What would have felt loving in that instance? What feels scary and terrifying about doing things differently? Yeah. What feels so risky that you don't want to do it? Yeah. Where do you feel like you're being judged or no one loves you? Yeah. Where do you feel like you're being made fun of? Where are you feeling like no one wants to pick you and no one wants to play with you and you're not a priority? Yeah. And then you get to deliver in loving her and parenting her and showing up to her in the day-to-day in new ways. Because what the wound will have you doing is sitting in the pain of that and waiting for your parents, waiting for your partner, waiting for your colleagues, waiting for your friends to show up and fulfill her needs for you. Yeah. Circling back to that heading we started with of codependency. Like, I need people to be a certain way before I can be happy. These things have to happen outside of me before internally I can feel fulfilled and safe and happy. And it's not true. Yeah. So I guess I just want to recap those few things that are required to shift your focus away from, or even your belief out of this idea that your parents have to change before you can heal, to realizing that you have all the power that you need within you, right? So the first is you have to be willing to acknowledge that everybody is an adult. Yeah. You are as much of an adult now as your parents are. And there's this inner child inside of you that doesn't know that. And she's waiting for you to show up for her in that adult capacity. Yeah. Number 2, you can reparent yourself. You don't have to wait on people outside of yourself. Right? And number 3, the sneaky, subtle piece of you will, to be able to heal and to be able to grow, you will no longer be able to use your pain or use your suffering as evidence or as a way to punish the people in your life that you want to have showing up for you who are not. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, if there's chronic illness, if there's anxiety, if there's depression, basically if there's any level of dis-ease, dysfunction, disharmony, whatever your pain is, whatever's feeling like that, is it emotional eating, right? There will be a piece, most likely internally, that is using that as, see, you won't agree with me that there's things to be taken responsibility here for. There's patterns that happened in childhood that weren't helpful or rewarding. Yeah. You won't admit that I'm right and you're wrong. And so instead, let me just use this piece so that it silently hums along in the background to prove to you that this is the evidence that I'm right and you're wrong. This is the evidence that my childhood was not done right. This is the evidence that you need to show up and behave in a different way. And, you need to love me better or love me differently. Because until you do, this evidence of dis-ease, dysfunction, disharmony is going to keep showing up. And that can be a really hard one to let go of. Yeah. Also to even acknowledge that it's present. And that's why I love to highlight around this. We don't necessarily, that doesn't mean you've intentionally been doing that. For some of us, we will be able to reflect and be like, oh yeah, I can definitely see how I've been doing that. But for some of us, it will also just be this subconscious pattern that we didn't realize was happening because we also didn't realize we had the power to shift or change it. Gonna leave this one here, my love. Thank you for being here for this conversation, my love. If you would like more free resources, if you'd like to learn about my programs or coaching opportunities, you can find all of that information at my website, gemmahanley.com. I'll link it below in the show notes. And if you would like to connect daily, head over and find me on Instagram. My handle there is Gemma E. Hanley, and I reply to all of my DMs there personally. If you enjoyed this episode and found it valuable, please share it with someone. You never know who needs to hear one little thing to take their day from feeling stuck and heavy to light and free. See you on the next one.